So I am
There we are.
right now, can you see it recording?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So welcome to the webinar, Unlocking the Culture Code. My name is Cynthia Forstmann, and we also have Diane Diaz. Diane,
Hello.
say
I'm
hello.
Diane Diaz with the Brand Teacher.
Awesome. And we're excited to have you and excited to share this conversation. We're actually going to stop sharing our videos now. We just wanted to say a quick hello so you can see we're live. But I think we'll get a better recording of the webinar if we don't share the video. And we are planning to send out a recording of this afterwards in case it's something that you feel like you want to share with others on your team. So again, my name is Cynthia Forstmann. I'm one of the founders of CultureTalk. And culture is a topic that's getting a lot of attention these days. We find that there's also a lot of confusion about what is culture and how do you impact it. And we know it's complicated. And it's because culture is influenced on all sides. It's influenced by our employees, by who's leading the company, the dynamics that happen between teams, and even by the expression of a brand internally or externally. So whether you own a business or are involved in helping a business build or uncover their culture, you're going to need an integrated approach, one that pulls those pieces of the culture puzzle together. And that's exactly what we want to share with you today. I'm giving you a sneak preview of a slide that talks about 12 archetypes. This is the framework we're going to introduce today, and we're going to demonstrate how these 12 storylines can be applied to 4 different kinds of culture conversations, creating a new level of understanding and strategic direction. So we'll come back to this slide later, but also stick around because if you find this framework really relevant to your work, we'll have a special offer for you at the end. And as I mentioned, we'll be emailing a link out to the webinar. So just you got to see us very briefly at the beginning, just a quick moment on our backgrounds and experience. I'm Cynthia with CultureTalk, and at CultureTalk, we offer cultural assessments and training to help organizations identify and evolve culture in order to reach their potential. We've been working with archetypes since about 2001. To build brands and communication programs. And more recently, we've expanded that body of thinking in order to help more people solve organizational challenges. Challenges that range from recruiting and engagement to culture integration, leadership development, and more. Let me also take a moment to introduce Diane. Diane and I met virtually about 6 years ago through our shared passion for archetypes. She was teaching a class, a graduate program at Forstmann University, and helping those graduates develop personal brands for themselves. And we met in that way. Diane is a self-proclaimed brand geek and a certified personal brand strategist and brand and social brand analyst. At her company, The Brand Teacher, she works with professionals and entrepreneurs to build personal brands so they can be rock stars in their careers and businesses. She also works with companies to align their employees' brands with the company brand. So thanks, Diane, for joining us.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Okay, and I just want to ask again, as you're coming in, if you're able to mute your microphone. I thought that would happen as the webinar began, but I think we have a setting wrong. So if you're just joining us a few minutes late, if you would just do me the favor of muting, that would be great. Okay, so perhaps the best way to start this conversation is by asking the question, what is culture? Here's an idea that I actually ran across last week. Somebody shared it with me. It's a quote from Brian Walker of IDEO. And he says, culture is like the wind. It is invisible, yet its effect can be seen and felt. Or here's the second idea that also stumbled across last week. This one is from Jacob Morgan, who wrote a book called The Future of Work. In a blog that was published last week, he said corporate culture is really hard to define. You might think about it as the side effects of working for your organization. He goes on to build out that analogy, saying just like pharmaceutical companies might offer you a new drug to treat insomnia, that drug or working at this company comes with all sorts of side effects. And you know, in the case of the insomnia pill, it might cause your hair to fall out or something terrible like that. But I think what both of these quotes get at is that culture can be really hard to get your head and your arms around, because it's not something tangible that can be seen, even though it's experienced. And it's not something that even can be touched, but it can be felt. Here, we refer to culture as the unwritten rules of engagement. It's kind of the experience of working in your company. It's the stuff that can't be captured adequately in an employee manual or a job description, yet it's the same stuff that's impacting the whole ecosystem of your organization. It's driving perceptions, it's driving beliefs, and it's driving behavior. Let me give you a little illustration of that. And a lot of people, when they're talking about culture, jump to the ping pong table. And it doesn't mean to say that having a ping pong table equals having a good culture. It doesn't. But if you take a close look at what kind of ping pong game is being played, you can begin to uncover some of the intricacies of culture. For example, in this picture, ping pong looks kind of fun and kind of friendly. In addition to the ping pong table, it looks like they've got pool and some exercise balls. So perhaps the culture at this company is one that prioritizes stress relief and health and well-being. But this picture looks like ping pong looks like a totally different game, doesn't it? It looks like one where people want to win and that there's a strong sense of competition that's playing out here at this table. Or in a third example, notice that these people, looks like they may be working late, right? So maybe they're playing ping pong at a company where the expectation is that, or the cultural expectation is, we're going to stay late and work hard. And maybe there's some diversions to kind of keep us motivated and give us a break. But the ping pong, again, the game is very different. So culture is not about having a ping pong table, but it is about what kind of ping pong game is being played at the company.
So speaking of ping pong games, this is an awful lot of styles of ping pong. This is another way to look at the underlying culture dynamics. So culture is why each of these technology companies that you see in this diagram, all in the same industry or category, by the way, behave completely differently from one another. Everything from organized chaos to all-out war. And we often read about the culture of Silicon Valley or the culture of a tech company, and each one of these companies has a full list of symptoms of culture that they win a long list of awards for every year. Yet each of these vastly different cultures works because the staff understands those unwritten rules that Cynthia talked about. And as you can see, culture is really complex and it's very unique in each company, even within the same industry. So if that's the case, how do you even begin to address this idea of culture? Culture within organizations can be super complex because there are so many moving parts. And when one piece of the puzzle doesn't fit, it can really cause all sorts of discord between employees, within teams, in relation to the organization's leaders, and even cause a disconnect with the company brand. That lack of harmony can then translate all the way through to the customer experience, which can damage the brand further. So it's imperative for us to understand this connection between employees, leaders, teams, and brands so that we can build harmony throughout the culture and deliver the best customer experience possible. Now, there are 4 pieces of this culture puzzle. And what we want to share with you today is how they can all be addressed with a single framework that makes that intangible idea of culture more tangible and gives everyone a shared understanding and language. I think we need a way to define and to talk about this and to think about this, to discuss the character of our culture and get everyone on the same page with what that culture looks and feels like. And that framework is archetypes.
So I'll talk a little bit about archetypes. The concept of archetypes comes to us from Carl Jung, who was the father of analytical psychology. He was a Swiss psychiatrist and a contemporary of Freud's. And he described archetypes as the symbols, the stories, the themes of human experience that operate really kind of like culture on an unconscious level. And yet these stories, symbols, themes, and characters have a shared universal meaning, and they're understood across geography, across history, across cultures. You may be familiar with Jung's work if you've ever taken a Myers-Briggs assessment. But what we're going to share today about archetypes might be thought about as the other side of the Jungian whole. When Carl Jung introduced the concept of archetypes, he noted that these universal stories manifest both on a personal level and collectively as characteristics of whole cultures. So what we call personality in an individual shows up as culture in a group, which is part of the reason that we are able to use these archetypal concepts in, with multiple pieces of the culture puzzle. Carol Pearson is a Jungian researcher that if you've read anything about archetypes, her name comes up a lot, particularly as it is, how do archetypes show up in the modern workplace? Here's a quote from her book, The Hero Within. Archetypes provide the deep structure for human motivation and meaning. When we encounter them in art, literature, sacred texts, and advertising, or in individuals or groups, they evoke deep feeling within us. So archetypes have the ability to get at sort of the deep themes of humanity in a really quick way, even when we don't know that they're operating. Here's the archetypal framework that I showed earlier that we use in our work. And I bet even as you're looking at the names of these 12 different archetype stories, you can begin to kind of guess, what they're about, what a hero story might embody, or by comparison, what an innocent story might be about. And that's kind of the beauty of this framework, is that it's really simple to understand. As human beings, we kind of get these stories. And there's really not an archetype that's a good archetype or a bad archetype. Rather, each archetype has strengths, and each archetype has what we call a shadow side. But we understand them because they're human stories. And in an organization, we can start to apply and see where they show up both in positive and negative ways. Every individual and every organization has the capacity for all 12 archetypes. But what we're going to share with you today is a way to look at what archetypes maybe are the most comfortable for an individual or organization and how they show up in their personality, culture, and brand.
Right, so that human element and that understanding of how to put the pieces of the culture puzzle together starts on that individual level with employees. Today's employees are looking for ways to fit within their organizations so that they can give the very best of themselves to achieve their professional goals, connect with their teams and leaders, and to reach company and, of course, their individual goals. If they struggle to fit within the organization's culture or to understand how their unique personality can contribute, they may look elsewhere for a better fit. And they really do want to do their best, but if they aren't given the resources that they seek, that they need, then they start looking for ways to find a place where they will be supported and fit in. You know, unemployment today is at an all-time low, and competition among employers to fill their positions is really fierce. So it is a candidate-driven market. And when employees can't find a good fit, they will move on. They know that they can. So that means it's imperative that we begin looking at the culture pieces and how we can help them to find this fit. Here's a great example to illustrate this. I worked with a client recently who was employed at a rather large organization in a mid-level role, managing a small team within the company. She had taken on leading a new team within the company recently, and so it had a slightly different dynamic to it. And because of that, she felt that she didn't quite fit into the culture of this new team, despite the fact that she had been at the company for nearly 25 years. You can imagine how frustrating that is to be with a company for so long and then all of a sudden feel like you don't fit in. So I began working with her to define her personal brand and to help her identify her true and authentic brand voice, the characteristics that made up her essence at work. And we wanted to ensure that her personal brand helped her to be successful in the workplace in her current role, but that it also took her toward her bigger goal of growing into a higher leadership position in the company. You know, for employees, it is so important for them to develop their personal brands. And frankly, employers really should be helping them to do this. You might think that it doesn't make sense for an employer to help employees develop their personal brands because, well, what if you help them develop amazing personal brands and then they leave the company? In fact, it is to the benefit of both the employee and the company when companies provide their employees with training and development on their personal brands. It actually ends up leading to higher employee morale. It increases employee retention. It then positions employees for leadership roles, and it even helps companies to attract stronger talent. So it's really a win-win proposition for everyone. Now, in order to work with my client on her personal brand, we actually began with this archetype assessment. And in doing this archetype assessment, what we learned is that her top archetype was the lover. We discussed all the characteristics of the lover archetype and how those showed up in her work. And the lover archetype is just what you might imagine by its name. It inspires deeper experiences, connects with those emotions, thrives on developing relationships, loves to bring people together and connect them, and loves to create harmony and consensus. So you can imagine that this is someone who might really excel in facilitating teamwork, right? That's a person who brings everyone together. And this is a person who truly exhibits that sense of connection building in her job. So as we compared the results of the archetype assessment and all these characteristics of the lover archetype as her top archetype to the feedback she'd received on 360 assessments from her team, we actually discovered that there was quite a lot of alignment between the lover archetype and the 360 feedback, which was great. But my client also wanted to grow into a higher leadership position. And remember, she was feeling a sense of discord in trying to do this within her current role. The discord was likely the result of these shadow characteristics of her lover archetype. So just as there are many positives to the lover archetype that we just discussed that allowed her to make the most of her strengths as an employee, there are also some shortcomings that might really make it a challenge for her to be an effective leader. Some of the shadow characteristics for her in the lover archetype include wanting to avoid tough situations, being prone to gossip, getting mired in drama. You can really see where those sorts of traits are not going to serve a leader very well. So these shadow traits could really derail her on this leadership path. When we find that a top archetype, such as in that example, has some shadow characteristics that might not be beneficial for our goals, what we do is we then look at what other archetypal energy do you have access to that could help you compensate for those shadow traits. And in this case, my client also reflected traits of the creator and the caregiver archetypes, both of which have traits that might better serve her as a leader. For example, the creator loves and thrives on organization, and the caregiver is really good at nurturing. So those might be better characteristics for someone moving into a leadership role. So this is a great example of how archetypes can be used for professional and leadership development for someone seeking a promotion within the organization.
Diane, I love that example. And I've seen in our work all different, really unique combinations of archetypes that show up for people. I was thinking about a leader that we worked with that actually scored really high on the jester archetype. And as people might guess, jester is an archetype about having fun, which might feel, odd for a leader who wants to be taken seriously. But the two supporting archetypes that that same leader brought to the table were the revolutionary archetype and the hero archetype. And in fact, this leader was brought into the company to try kind of lead some big transformations at work. And so having that revolutionary mandate to turn things upside down and being able to deliver on that responsibility, with some of the lightness of jester that made it a little less threatening, a little bit more fun, and also, the work ethic of a hero who's going to jump into the melee with you and roll up their sleeves. I think they played really well. So we've seen lots and lots of different combinations of archetypes. And again, I go back to, it's not really a good or a bad judgment. It's more about what can you do and how can you deliver on your unique strengths.
That's a really great example you shared.
Yeah. So let's move into thinking about archetypes and teams. Diane sort of shared an example of her individual client and their personal brand, also their attempt to evolve into a stronger leader and how archetypes assisted with that. And a lot of this is about making people aware of how they show up. And allowing them to look for ways to enhance their own strengths and their own behaviors and sort of manage for the things that might show up in a shadow that could cause them harm. And so when we think about a team, a team is made up of lots of different archetypal profiles. And so helping employees individually and then collectively as members of a team explore what's happening on an archetypal level can really lead to an entirely different team dynamic. So let me pick up on Diane's example and share that one of my top archetypes is lover, which Diane talked about, among others. And in a recent client experience, I found that I was dealing with somebody that I could type as sort of a strong ruler archetype. So what does a ruler bring to a party? We definitely need people in organizations that bring ruler archetypal energy. The ruler is a person that very quickly stands up to lead, that takes on and enjoys leadership roles, that is quick to establish kind of roles and relationships and different ways of interacting in order that they can create a stable work environment. They want to be successful and they know how to lead other people into being successful, and they do that by developing policies and procedures, all in the name of sort of taking control and leading the charge. So, if thinking about myself working with somebody with high ruler energy, and looking at the lover and the ruler dynamic as they come together, here's some of what you might see that a lover and a ruler share. First of all, they both are archetypes that share a fear of being betrayed. They enjoy the finer things in life. hang on. I'm going to, actually, I think there's someone who's not unmuted. Diane, that's you.
Are you guys still looking for a place to stay tonight? Because you can always stay at our place.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
If there's somebody who thinks they may not be muted, I'm hearing one more person and I just want to. Okay. Diane, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure, but I mean.
Hang on one more second.
I think the next time I probably see is, yeah. So we'll make.
Okay, sorry.
There you got it.
It's hard when you get on a webinar sometimes. I can't drive and talk at the same time. Sorry, everybody. Okay, so back to this lover-ruler dynamic. They both really care about how they appear in the world. Appearances are important. They're also archetypes that earn a high degree of trust. A ruler because they know what they're doing, and a lover because they value that relationship with others. And finally, they also are very adept at aligning people with the right roles and partnerships. So these are some of the ways when a lover and ruler come together that they can really share their strengths. But they also have very different perceptions and behaviors that might work in opposition to each other. So I'll just give you a few examples. A lover really values harmony and equality, while a ruler is very clear that they're the one in charge. Thinking about them from an emotional intelligence level, the lover tends to be more intense and maybe have a romantic worldview, while the ruler is going to be more even-keeled and have a more realistic worldview. For the lover, their strength actually comes through being vulnerable, whereas the ruler is very much less likely to show you their cards because they need to exert power. So they don't want you to see what's operating underneath the surface. Lovers willing to compromise, rulers more focused on winning and not compromising what they need. And then finally, a lover very willing to make self-sacrifice, where a ruler is more about sacrificing to move their own agenda ahead. So thinking again about these two coming together, as I became aware of what kind of archetype was brought to the table in my client, I was able to appreciate that relationship in a new level. It gives us an opportunity to maybe strengthen the ways we're aligned. And also it gives us kind of clues about where our relationship between each other can get off track. Mm-hmm. And knowing that information helped me as a partner in the business to position things in a way to try to avoid conflict with someone who was coming at the same issues from a very different standpoint. So if you think about just this one dynamic between two archetypes, and then consider that in any organization, there's a good chance that all 12 archetypes are at play, and there are all kinds of dynamics. So, that same lover might have to deal with an every person at work, and that might look and feel really different. And they might also be in some kind of dynamic with a creator. So understanding again how they connect and conflict with the creator can enhance their success on the team. Our good friend Carl Jung has something to say about understanding archetypes to others. He says, everything that irritates us in someone else can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. And so I think the point here is that as we help our teams and employ individuals on teams become archetypally aware, we have a whole new level of possibility for how well we can work together. For kicks, we included a slide here. If you don't know, this television show is called Lost. And there was a whole cast of characters who were stranded on a deserted island after their plane went down in the Pacific. And as you can see, all of these different energies at play in these different characters. Imagine your team trying to operate with all of that different energy. Okay. Finally, let's talk about archetypes and brands. Up to now, we've been talking about personal archetypes, and we've been asking the questions like, who am I? What is my leadership style? How do I connect with others? But now we want to switch gears and talk more about who are we? Because the archetypes that show up at a brand level or within an organizational culture, it's actually more than just a collection of the individual archetypes. When we get together as a company or with any group, really, that creates some unique archetypal patterns as well. So to illustrate how archetypes show up in brands, let's consider a brand that we all know, Southwest Airlines. And there's been a lot written about Southwest and its leadership and sort of the unique dynamics. And what Diane and I have to share is we've taken it apart, looking at Southwest from the lens of that lover archetype that we've been talking about. And also Diane's going to share a little bit about the jester archetype and how that might be at play at Southwest. So I'll start and share that, how does Southwest embody a lover archetype? And I'll say that it's actually something that can be seen expressed outwardly in their brand. If you look at the body of this plane and the Southwest logo, there's actually a heart right next to the word Southwest. And even if you looked at the underside of the plane, they actually paint a heart under the belly of every plane. We've seen clients take their brand and use their brand archetype and use it literally in the physical expression of their space, their office building. And you might say if your office were a plane, these are two ways that Southwest brings the lover to life, even in that physical way.
Can I just add something that
Sure.
as you're talking about literally bringing the archetype into the brand, my archetype is the sage, which is sort of the wise person sharing information, and my company is the brand teacher. So it's at play there in the name of the company.
Yeah, I think in brands, they have the opportunity really to kind of serve as a blueprint for some of those creative components that we have to tackle. Here's all, they own this lover, unabashedly. This is almost sort of an interesting quote from Herb Kelleher, their founder, where he just boldly comes out and says, this company is stronger if it's bounded by love rather than by fear, which if you think about that in the context of corporations, it's really sets them apart in terms of how they position themselves. Or if you go to their website today, some of the work that's come out under Gary Keller, their current CEO, are a whole bunch of statements about their culture. I chose this one because here you can see the lover again at play in the words. As Diane just mentioned, at Southwest Airlines, it's always been about heart. It's about connecting people and championing communities because distance shouldn't keep us from being neighbors. Whether in the air or on the ground, we believe community is more than a place. It's at the heart of what brings us together. And I'll give you one last example of the lover at play, and that's that if you look at the stock ticker symbol that they use to trade under, it's actually love.
That's so good.
With their with their jester personality, misspelled as LUV, which is probably a good lead-in for you, Diane.
Yes. So as Cynthia mentioned, not only is Southwest the lover archetype, but they're also the jester archetype. So this is a great example of this complex nature of culture, right? So jesters aren't concerned with the rules. They love to have fun. They like to make people laugh. They're playful and spontaneous. They like to do the unexpected. They like to be unpredictable. And they live in the moment and truly enjoy their work. And this really fits Southwest to a T. So if you look at anything about Southwest, if you search on YouTube for Southwest, you're going to find great examples of how they're living out this jester archetype. And we're not going to play this video here because in the Zoom setting, it won't work very well. But this video is of a flight attendant that was taken while they were landing. And she was welcoming them to the city, welcoming the passengers to the city that they were landing in. And she started her comment with, "How about that landing? Not bad for his first time." So you can see she's sort of, making fun of the fact that it's his first time landing, which clearly it's not. And then she says later on, she goes on to say, "Please be careful when opening overhead bins because, shift happens." So once again, that's working in that humor element because not only are they the lover, but they're also the jester. And you can find all sorts of videos of Southwest flight attendants singing rap songs, singing lullabies, telling jokes. It's how they live out the brand archetype in the work that they do every day.
I think it's, I know, Diane, a lot of people who share a love of Southwest Airlines in terms of it being their favorite airline. And I'm just thinking, how different that experience where they kind of take the stress out and lighten things up, how different it is from other experiences and how truly that does come out of the culture.
Absolutely.
And how it really even distinguishes them in terms of attracting people.
It does, and it also creates that really amazing, positive customer experience at the end of the day because we know flying can be so stressful. So I think you can see by all these examples how complex culture can be and how complicated it can be to get all those pieces of the culture puzzle to fit together to build a positive experience for everyone, like the way that Southwest is doing. And this quote from Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, I think sums it up the best. He said, "The only thing we have is one another. The only competitive advantage we have is the culture and values of the company. Anyone can open a coffee store. We have no technology. We have no patent. All we have is the relationship around the values of the company and what we bring to the customer every day. And we all have to own it." And I think that really says it all, that it is truly about the culture, right? Because they're selling coffee. It is about the culture and how they connect.
Yeah. And even in this quote where he talks about the relationship around the values. So again, a way to think about our individual relationships with companies, with our personal brands. What do our personal brands bring to the value of the company? How do we interact as a team around the value of the company? We know that companies like Starbucks don't just create cultures like that without being really intentional about the work. And so I think a final point on archetypes, whether you are thinking about how they apply to an individual, a leader, a team, or a brand, is that really as you start to understand this very simple framework and learn how to assess what kind of archetypal energy might be at play in your own company, that awareness in and of itself allows the people that are leading and working in the company to be more intentional about what they're trying to create internally and externally. And there's also just so many fun ways to play with this whole archetypal dynamic from a creative and a strategic standpoint. So those were some of the highlights that we wanted to share about the work we're doing with organizations and leaders in the culture brand space. And I wanted to open up if you have questions about some of the things we're discussing here, we would love to get them in the chat panel. I did get a couple of questions that came in earlier that I think maybe, Diane, we could tackle, while we're seeing if there are any other questions the group wants to ask here. One, and I think this one is best answered by you, people, when they're thinking about personal branding and archetypes, one thing they ask is kind of like, well, now that I know my archetype, what do I do? What do I do with that information?
Right.
And also, how does it show up maybe, in the social sphere in particular? I know that's an area of expertise for you.
Right. And so it's interesting that quote that we just read talks about, it's the only thing that we have, because that's often what I tell my clients is that, no matter what industry you're in, whether you're a health coach, whether you are a florist, it doesn't matter. There's other competitors, and the only thing you have that they don't is your personal brand, right? So once we understand your archetype for yourself, and we can analyze how that shows up in your business, and then I help my clients take that information, all those characteristics that make them unique and authentic, and make sure that it's coming across, for example, in your LinkedIn profile. So making sure that your LinkedIn summary is written with that personality in mind so that you do stand out and it doesn't read like everyone else's resume, right? So we make sure that those elements of your unique archetypal profile show up on your Facebook page, on your LinkedIn profile, even if you're printing materials, just making sure that those things come across and that unique personality is conveyed.
And it's funny because I think that people are looking on that personal level to be individuals, but also for a way to be professional. And so professional doesn't have to look and feel the same way. We can each bring sort of our own energy to it.
And we should, because that's how we'll connect with others.
Yeah. Another question I get asked that came in previously has to do with in organizational culture, people that are working with, say, in the merger and acquisition space. So a situation where two different cultures might be coming together. And what we know about that is that a lot of things in terms of an acquisition might look really good on paper. So the two organizations might complement each other in terms of, audience or market reach or products and services. They may be looking at ways to combine, their operational aspects, like their compensation programs or accounting, so forth. But sometimes where they really struggle the most is in how to integrate the two brands, or the two cultures, into a culture where we're all going to participate together. I was at a training session last week where someone who's very experienced in this work was working with a company in Washington, D.C. that was rather large, and a company in Boulder, Colorado that was sort of lean and mean. And the company in Washington, D.C. was making the acquisition because they really wanted the unique team and dynamic of what the Boulder office had to offer. And so one way to think about, just like I earlier showed how archetypes come together on an individual level in terms of our relationships with other members of the team, you can also look at two organizational cultures from the perspective of what are their archetypes and how are those archetypes going to come together, in an organizational culture. Diane, I'm looking at a question that just came in from Stephanie, and she says, how do you best find out or define both what your brand and personal archetype is?
That's a good question. And I think part of that question almost sounds like getting a handle on how brand or personal brand is related to personal archetype. So when I work with my clients and we do this archetype assessment, that's sort of the foundation for then building your personal brand. And you can imagine your personal brand, almost like if you think of the Southwest brand, your personal brand has a sort of an amalgamation of characteristics to it that make it up. And whatever your archetypes are, whatever, when you do the archetype assessment, what comes out from that make up those elements of your personal brand. So they're really one and the same. So your personal brand is that set of archetypal characteristics, and then we take that and make sure those things are coming across in everything that you're doing online and offline. Did that sort of answer your question, Stephanie?
I'm going to add one piece to that, Diane,
Yes, sure.
and to Stephanie and others. There are archetypal assessments tools. We offer some at CultureTalk. There are also other organizations that, if you Googled archetypal assessments, offer both free and paid versions of different tools that you can do a self-assessment, or you could look at an organizational assessment to help a group of people identify kind of what's at play. Awesome. Do you have other questions? Diane, did anything else come across your desk?
I think you might have touched on this a little bit, but I get a question a lot when I work with clients, and just even when I do speaking engagements, about how can we use archetypes in building creative aspects of a brand? So if I'm working with an entrepreneur, for example, how can that archetypal information then show up in their creative elements, like their website or logo design? What do we do with that information, and how do we make sure it's showing up?
Yeah, we get that a lot too. And actually, I think it's one of the most powerful applications of archetypes, even as it comes to sort of building out brand in the physical space. And that's that the archetypes that are present in your culture can come together in such a way that they might provide, let's say, sort of a blueprint for the creative components. So, we know that there's stories, and there's stories that are rich in symbolism and ideas and words and concepts. So just like Southwest is able to pull on some of that archetypal energy that comes out in Lover and Jester to really get playful and be bold about talking about how important love is in their business. I think no matter what your archetypal profile it is, there's that same opportunity to apply it in creative ways. We've seen, interior design firms, for example, look at an organization's culture and say, hey, what does that conjure up in terms of space, in terms of, the arrangement of furniture, the types of furniture, the types of, Google is kind of famous for how they've transformed organizational space. But not everybody is Google. So if you understand kind of what your unique archetypal pattern is, that would enable you to really build out in words and copy and brand and marketing and communication, in employee experiences, and even in the paint on the walls, sort of all working together around that unique profile.
That's great. Good.
Awesome. Well, we are getting towards the end. I've shared here both mine and Diane's email addresses, and we'd be delighted to have a follow-up conversation with anybody who is interested in exploring this a little bit more deeply. I'll also share that if you're somebody who is doing this kind of work in your business, either training, doing some professional development, looking at culture issues, looking at brand issues. We are at CultureTalk hosting a tour, a multi-city tour. We had an event in Boulder last month. We're coming to New York. We're going to be in Orlando, Florida, where Diane will be part of that 2-day experience. As well as Saratoga Springs, New York, back in December, where we have an office, teaching sort of a 2-day deep immersion class in archetypes and how they can be applied to a multitude of culture conversations. And you can use, if you're interested in that, you can check it out on our website under culturetalk.com/certification. And this coupon code CertifyMe2017 will actually earn you $250 off of that registration. So something to think about. We appreciate everybody joining us on this Tuesday morning, afternoon, and wish you some new ideas. I hope this spurred some new ideas for you in thinking about your own brand and the culture of your organization.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And if you've got any additional questions, if you think of something after this session, please feel free to email us with your questions.
Thank you. And we'll send out a link to the recording. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.